And my first move for this episode is Eyimofe, which translates to This Is My Desire. And it's a 2020 drama film set in Lagos, Nigeria. It follows two individuals, a middle-aged technician named Mof and a young hairdresser named Rosa, each of whom plan to start a better life overseas. These dreams, however, are derailed by the tragedies and challenges of everyday life. Eyimofe is a beautifully shot, beautifully acted debut film from filmmaking brothers Arie and Chuko Esiri. It takes inspirations from post-war Italian neorealist films, utilizing real locations and focusing on poor and working-class people as they grapple with tough economic conditions and even tougher moral choices. Eyimofe is a slow-paced film, but also very confident, deliberate, and empathetic. The camera is often still and the takes long, allowing you to appreciate the narrative through the subtle and complex expressions of the performers and the dense layers of me invested in the scenes. So I was really impressed with this film. I really enjoyed it. But what did you think, Bina?
Yeah, I mean, incredibly impressive for a debut. I think beautifully shot, acted, constructed, incredibly moving. Really shows all the complexities of the moral choices of life in a city that's, very stratified by class, by economic opportunity. One of the things I thought was really interesting was how, when it comes to the female story, she's both transactional with men and women. Like, it doesn't feel, in some ways it's gendered, right, with the landlord and the boyfriend, but in other ways it's not. So it's very moving. I did find it, the only criticism I would make is I did find the structure a bit tricky. So you start off with the guy's story, which is very moving. Chekhov's junction box, as I jokingly called it in the notes. And then you move to the woman's story, and then at the end you get back to the guy. But I was just kind of like, I felt like there was a whole movie for both of them in a way. And what did having both of them really add? I'm not sure if the linkages were strong enough for me, although they're both struggling, I guess, they both want to leave the country, so that's a linkage. But I'm not sure that the two halves were additive. But they're both incredibly good. And I just, it's kind of like, I'm really glad you pointed me in the direction of this film, because now it's a director that I will look out for going forward. Very, very powerful and highly recommended from my perspective.
Yeah, it was a great film. It was a very depressing film. I think from the title, I was for some reason thinking it might be a romance, but it wasn't at all. But it was so good. I just felt, especially the actor who played Mof, was just such an interesting performance, like so emotional. I mean, both really, but I just felt like that scene where he breaks down and just, he says so little, but he says so much with his face, and he's so restrained,
so
so
much is
calm and
held
so
in.
patient. Yeah, it's
But I felt
beautiful.
it was hopeful for him at the end, like when you pick up the jackets and you realise he is going to run his own electrical shop. I felt that was hopeful, and he has taken his nephew in. He's let someone else into his life. Like, he's such a loner. He doesn't really have a love life. I think he just feels economically he can't afford anything. And he just wants to leave. But I guess by the end of it, he's grounded. He's got roots. He's like, I can't leave. It's a hopeless hope, but I can make a life here that's good and meaningful. So I thought that was more hopeful than the woman's story. I found that really depressing. Like, what is left to trade? Everything from your iPhone to your body to your marital status to a baby. I mean, there's nothing that isn't potentially transactional. And even though you feel she actually might genuinely get on with the guy that she meets, the businessman, it's kind of like, what hope is there for that? Because even he's suspicious. They're both mutually suspicious, because what hope has real emotion got in a very transactional world? So I found that kind of like definitely more heartrending.
Yeah, and it feels suffocating at times, like just constantly need to be paying for things, for rent, for hospital bills, for lawyers, even for coffins. It just keeps, no matter how hard you try, and they're very determined at the beginning of each of their stories. They've got their passports, they're getting their visas, they're excited, they want to start this new life. And I guess it's not a desire for another person, it's a desire for a place, and it's a desire for escape. I think they've lived in these situations for a long time. They know how precarious and unstable and dangerous it can be. You're just one accident away from poverty and degradation, and they're so close.
I think
it just sucks them back in.
Yeah, there's really no escape. And actually, I was thinking, what if they'd even succeeded, coming to Italy or Spain, respectively? They're still
Mm,
going to be leading a very precarious economic existence as a first generation immigrant, also probably suffering from racism. And
mm.
some of the Kafkaesque stuff that they're dealing with, like, you said about getting the probate and like resolving the sister's estate. Well, we're going through something similar at the moment. I mean, like, Kafkaesque bureaucracy seems to be like a universal truth.
Hmm.
And it's kind of funny living in Europe, the Europe they're trying to escape to, thinking, yeah, like in terms of earning power, for sure you'll be better off, but a lot of what you're trying to escape will follow you, and there'll be added problems. Because at least here, what was really fascinating to me is it's a story that truly is Nigerians in Nigeria, that it's not concerned as much with sort of colonial stuff, or it is of itself. And I'm like, there is something good about being in the majority in your own country that they
Well,
probably
exactly.
underestimate.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like you could see the reverse that well, I mean, where do they think all of these systems come from? They come from Europe, this transactional, ruthless economy. And you could imagine someone from the West, having this romantic notion of Africa, and it's a simple life, and you can focus on
Oh, I
the
think
simple
Prince
things
Harry
in
has
life.
that, doesn't he? He goes to Botswana for being
Yeah.
free of the West corruption. You just think, oh, mate, that's so racist of itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a grind for these people. And I was reading a few articles, and the filmmakers described it as a migration story in reverse, because so many of these films are the story of someone coming to a new place and trying to fit in. But this is the story of where they came from and why they wanted to leave.
Mm,
And it's not necessarily, they deal with many tragedies, but it's not war torn necessarily. It's not like a one big thing that frightens them away. It's just this really tough life that they just can't get ahead in. And it's very dehumanizing as well. We talk about the transactional nature of their
mm.
existence and the precarity, but even the way they're referred to. Mofe's boss doesn't even call him by his name. She just calls him engineer.
Yeah,
And
exactly. You're
and the
just a
way that
commodity or a cog in the
yeah,
wheel. You're just your function, your form and your
yeah,
function, which
yeah,
is you're a womb, or you're an engineer, or you're just what you can provide as a service, effectively.
you're only permitted shelter and food on the basis of how you can serve. And the
Mm,
way that the rich guy's friends are sort of making fun of her, stereotyping her, Rosa as this gold digger.
mm.
Just yeah, it's horrible. But it's such a realistic or such a detailed look into these worlds, or a sort of deconstruction of these stereotypes. So
Yeah.
empathetic and full of humanity. It was great.
And it covers a lot in 2 hours. I mean, I would really say to people, like, I've never been to Lagos, and I really feel I have a sense of it as a city. And I would really encourage people to watch it just on that basis. Because, like I say, second largest city in Africa, we all have a duty to sort of like know more and be more better educated about things. So, yeah, I mean, I just think just the way he lenses it, a lot of it reminded me of how Martin Scorsese did his early films like Mean Streets, where with Rosa in particular, she's always centered. Like there's this really interesting scene where she's sitting in a car with a friend. There's some other women chatting outside, and the conversations are cross-cutting. But he puts her. She's all. It's often from her. So even say if her sister's standing up and talking to her, and she's on the mattress, the film will be on her, and you'll only see the sister's legs. It's really interesting. So you're like you say, neither of them really say so much, but they are the center around which the action revolves. And I often thought, in a sense, it makes them passive. Like everything is whirling around them, and they're almost kind of like, like you say, trapped or claustrophobic. Or what choice do they really have? How much agency do they really have? Really
Yeah,
well shot.
and they're not active agents in this world. They're just kind of the recipients of this world. They're part of it,
Mm,
and they just receive it.
mm.
It acts upon them, but they have
Yeah.
very little agency within it.
If you're a Marxist or believe in sort of like structural sort of oppression, this is the film for you, because this really shows people trapped in a sort of class or economic oppression.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but phenomenal.
Yeah, and I thought, talking a bit about the setting, I thought it was interesting the way it sort of contrasts the setting, the stark difference between the heat and the dust and the crumbling facades of Rosa and Mofe's homes, and then and the hospital even. And then you see the kind of the restaurant where she works and the hotel where she has dinner with
Mm.
that boyfriend. It is that very stark class difference to the point where there's almost two different Lagoses occupying the same space, but just worlds apart.
Yeah, and I think it's something that you see very starkly in places like Kenya and India that I'm familiar with. But honestly, I'm sitting right now on the Isle of Dogs, which is a part of East London where you have the newly built in the 1990s financial centre, so incredible wealth, right? All the investment banks and everyone
Mm.
living in high-rise flats that are newly built and really phenomenal. But we're cheek by jowl. We're sitting in Tower Hamlets, which is one of the most deprived wards of Europe with a high level of immigrants from places like Bangladesh, huge deprivation, literally street by street. So I think, in a way, sometimes when you're in Western countries, quote unquote, developed, it also exists where you are, but it's kind of easier to see. I think you get to acclimatize to it, like
Mhm.
to function. And then you see it more when you watch foreign films
Mm.
and forget how much it really is present in your society too. Sometimes, or for me, let me just say for me, let me not impose that on anyone else.
And you can see how, like, it would just drive you insane, like the Kafkaesque nature of it. Like, not just the bureaucracy, but the fact that nothing works, that you're constantly having to fix everything. Just imagine all the machines that you rely on in your daily life. Imagine if you got into your car and it didn't start. Imagine if you got onto a lift and it broke
Mm.
down halfway between floors. Imagine if you tried to turn your phone on and it just sparked and turned off. Like,
And
we rely
that's
so
the
much on all
difference,
of these
isn't it?
systems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can live in a place like London, which fundamentally is incredibly unequal, but it's a
Mm,
functioning state,
mm,
and there is a difference between a functioning and a failed state. So a
yeah.
state where that you can't rely on the justice system, you can't rely on the hospital system, you can't rely that the bus is going to come and the road's going to work and the water's going to come and it's going to be clean. So that's the privilege, isn't it? And maybe it's better I suppose that's their calculation.
Mm,
It's better to get to a different country and tolerate being a minority and maybe suffering racial injustice, but just being in a state that functions.
mm,
Um, you know, that's as a second gen immigrant, I think that's very much the calculation that my parents and grandparents made, respectively.
mhm.
But no, I thought this was so powerful and actually very translatable. I think, like, if you're someone who watches Mike Leigh films, realist films about class inequality in the UK or anywhere else, I think that this is very it's so particular, but it's also very relatable.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, on the structure, it didn't bother me too much. I kind of take your point that it did almost feel like two separate films, very tangentially connected by location and theme, but the characters don't really interact as far as I could tell. It was strange watching this alongside Confusion Nawa, which is very much like showing the intersection of all these characters within a city, whereas this is very isolationist. Like, these feel like very lonely people. So maybe the fact that they never meet adds to that sense of isolation, and that there are people out there like you, but you're made to feel so alone by your circumstances. I do get how it's frustrating. But I don't know. To me, it was just so good that that I didn't mind it.
Yeah.
Like, I'll tolerate
I
anything
mean,
if
maybe
it's
not
good enough.
frustrating. I just didn't find it multiplicative, right?
Hmm.
I didn't find
Yeah.
it amplified anything. I thought it was like, oh, this is interesting, and now this is interesting. But yeah, but like
I
you
did
say,
get
it's a
such a
phenomenal
thrill
film.
though. I did get such a
Yeah,
thrill when Grace was just all along the street and she happens across Mofe and he's got his
yeah,
own
yeah. It's like
little
yes.
outdoor business. Like, yes, that was such a yeah, that was great. And it is nice to have that epilogue and feel that sense of hope. But yeah, Rose's the end of Rose's storyline was just gutting.
Yeah.
But it's so moving. It's a
Oh,
testament
it's
to the
absolutely
filmmaking.
devastating. But it's a
Yeah,
city twice the size of London, so the chances of two people meeting are de minimis.
yeah, yeah, sure. But yeah, definitely want to keep an eye out on what that filmmaker does next, or what
Mm.
those two filmmakers do next, for sure.